Good afternoon. It is a beautiful Sunday in May, and Book TV is on location in New Haven, Connecticut, home of Yale University and also the home of our guest for our in-depth program, Harold Bloom. Will be with us for the next 3 hours to talk about his writing life and his career. We're on the steps of your house as we get started this afternoon, Professor Bloom. And you know, I was thinking as I was getting ready for this, you have been in this town since you arrived here as a graduate student in 1951. What does New Haven, Connecticut really mean to you?
Well, not a question that I would have expected, Susan. I don't know. Having been born and raised in New York City, I still have a distressing habit when we get the local paper to call it the local paper. It's very complex. I mean, I'm not sure that I could say, after almost half a century of teaching at Yale, that I could answer the question what it is that Yale University means or has meant to me. New Haven went through an unhappy change back around 1967 during the Middle Eastern War when the Arab oil boycott came in. It had been a manufacturing town, like so many towns, cities in southern New England, Danbury, Bridgeport, and suddenly the price of natural gas and oil went up by about, I suppose, 5, and all the industries here moved away. There had been a huge factory out in Wallingford close by. There had been the Winchester Gun Works here from time immemorial, the Olin chemical factory. Really, all the local employers except Yale fled to the Tennessee Valley in search of cheap power from 67 on. And the city went, I think, into a kind of permanent recession from which it still certainly has not recovered. So it's been a rather forlorn city in many ways for such a long time.
Well, as we stand here on the steps of your home, how far away is the Yale campus?
Oh, it's about 1 mile down Whitney Avenue. No more than that. I used to walk in all the time. Now that I've gotten older and slower and at times feebler, especially recently, I tend to be driven in, which isn't as healthy, since I now, and this still surprises me, I work out 3 times a week in the cardiac rehabilitation gym, hardly believing that's myself there. And
you've also taken this year off from teaching in order to get your health back in line.
Well, Yale kindly disabled me, and so did NYU, where I teach part of the time these last 15 years. No, I would have been in no condition.
Will you be back on campus soon?
Oh, yes. I actually went in last week to meet the freshmen who were finishing their year of the Directed Studies program, in which I tend to center all of my teaching now. And it was very, very moving to meet them all. And come September, I'll be back teaching full-time at Yale, and also once a week down at New York University Graduate School.
You know, any person who lives not in a city will recognize it's Sunday afternoon and the lawnmowers are now going. So we're going to take a little bit of a detour. We were going to stand out here for a while, but since it's getting noisy, why don't we move on inside and we'll pick up our conversation from there. Why don't you lead the way?
Oh, thank you, dear.
Now, I'm told that you do a great deal of your work in the house.
I do all my work in the house or in our apartment on Washington Square North when I'm in New York. I used to work in my study on the...
We're going to over into the dining room first.
Oh, yes. I used to work in my study on the 3rd floor, but in the last year or two when I started not feeling well, I felt too much in solitude and away from my wife up there. So poor thing, I have taken away her dining room table for the most part.
Now, one coming into your system looks at this and says, how do you get any work done? Now, talk to us a little bit about how you organize this into the many books that you are working on.
Well, I scribble in those big ledger books. I never learned to type. I'm hopelessly archaic. And there's always been a tremor in my hands from the time I was a little one. So I have, fortunately, I have research assistants, and they put it on a computer, and then I read it off with them. And I guess that's pretty much how I do it.
When do you most often work? Do you have a pattern to it?
These days, especially in this long recuperation from an open heart operation, Susan, I tend to wake up about 4:30 in the morning. I come down and drink large quantities of, alas, decaffeinated English breakfast tea. Both caffeine and alcohol are now permanently forbidden. And usually by the time Jean comes down around 5 a.m., I start sitting here and scribbling in ledgers for a few hours. That tends to be when I write.
You're working on your next book. What is it?
Well, I finished a huge anthology with commentary, which will come out a year from now, next April, for HarperCollins.
Is this the manuscript right here?
Yes, and there's the table of contents and the title page. It's called The Best Poems of the English Language, Chaucer through Robert Frost. And I'm trying to finish, in fact, I will finish by Labor Day, another book for my publisher more often than not, Penguin, Putnam Riverhead, tentatively called Reaching Wisdom, though the title is too pompous, so I may have to find another one, and I certainly am never going to reach any wisdom anyway. But the subtitle is The Use of Literature for Life, and that will stay there, and I'll just have to find another title.
One gets the sense in looking at this that you work all the time.
Well, yeah, I haven't been able to teach this year. Once I start teaching again next September, full-time at Yale, and as I say, down in New York City for New York University Graduate School, then I won't be able to work quite as incessantly, but I'll do what I can. I'm addicted to it, so I mean, I read all day and all night anyway. I'm not much of a sleeper, and on a good night, I manage 3.5 or 4 hours, and that is usually with the help of some sedative.
Why don't we, since our gardener outside has changed our plans a little bit, take our places in the next room, and we'll get settled in and tell our audience a little bit about how to join us. Now, you're out on the road soon promoting your latest book, which is...
No, I was out on the road. I am back from it. I think I have just one more trip down to New York. Look at camera. I would rather look at your blue eyes, if I'm allowed to say so. Can I look at you and not the camera?
You certainly can.
Oh, good.
You certainly can.
No, I've mostly finished traveling for a short book called Hamlet, Poem Unlimited. It was my sorrow that a rather large book called Genius, a Mosaic of 100 Exemplary Creative Minds, I guess too encyclopedic a book, really. It's an abandoned child since they gave me the open heart, rather invasive, of necessity, surgery. Literally on the day the book was published, I was never able to do anything for it.
Well, let me show the audience what the Genius book looks like. Now, I want to ask a question that is really too simplistic, but I'm going to presume that some people who are watching us right now are being introduced to you for the first time. And if you could give us a sense of the defining idea or the defining Harold Bloom that is the essence of all these books that I'm surrounded with. If they were to pick up any of the, what is it that defines your body of work?
Well, Susan, I'm turning 73 this July, and I started very early. Though again, sounds almost pompous to say it, but I guess there are 3 phases. I started out very much in the middle and later 1950s as a kind of romantic revivalist, you might say, arguing against T.S. Eliot and what in those days was called the New Criticism. That seems hopelessly archaic now in 2003. On behalf of William Blake and Shelley and Keats and Wordsworth and Coleridge and so on, and in general of the 19th century and indeed 20th century romantic tradition, down through, as I would define it, William Butler Yeats, Hart Crane, D.H. Lawrence, Wallace Stevens. And then I passed into a kind of long middle phase in the later 1960s and earlier and mid 1970s, where I became obsessed with something I still haven't been able to really work through. Martin Heidegger, a philosopher with whom I am not much in sympathy, nevertheless has one sentence somewhere which struck me, where he says that it is necessary to think one thought and one thought only and think it through to the end. For him, that was what he calls Dasein, being. For me, it has been influence, particularly literary influence, but indeed influence in the general sense, which is still not, I think, a process any of us, myself certainly included, fully understand, including the very complicated question of the influence of a mind, a more or less creative mind, upon itself. Especially fascinating, of course, where, with the greatest of writers, Shakespeare, where we have no information whatsoever as to his inner life or inward being, so that we have to surmise it. But in any case, I stayed at that for quite a long time, until the middle 1980s, and then partly under the influence of an endless enterprise which I've carried on for at least 20 years now. I think I've edited by now, with introductions and editor's notes, between 11 and 1,200 critical anthologies for Chelsea House Books, and moved by the necessity of writing less esoterically and with more clarity for people who would include high school students. I think learned to handle these things very differently. And then, though, I've made a resolution to try to avoid all polemic, which is always very difficult for me. I was thinking about that before we began today, and I have never been an intense admirer of T.S. Eliot, though he certainly was a great poet, even if I'm never really in sympathy with him. But in 4 quartets, at one point, he dismisses his own past polemics by saying rather beautifully, "These things have served their purpose, let them be." And I suppose, partly in reaction to my own polemicism and my deep distaste for what had begun really, it's gone on for 33 or 35 years now, and it's really the effect of the so-called counterculture, which I think has now just about become our official culture in what increasingly, perhaps too disdainfully, I refer to as the mediaversity. I decided to just do an end run around the whole academy and try to write for as broad a general public as possible, starting with a book on the Bible called The Book of J, which came out in 1990. And for these last 13 years, that's what I've done increasingly in what I've written. I go on teaching and hope to go on teaching until I obviously am too feeble or too hopelessly a dinosaur to be of any use to my students. But I feel, have felt for a long time, a lot of alienation. I don't approve of turning literary studies into what they call cultural studies. But that's pretty much where I am now.
Let me take just a short pause to tell our audience how they can get involved in the conversation, because that's what makes in-depth work. Those of you who are regular watchers of our once-a-month series know that we're going to spend most of this time listening to your questions. Many of you, I'm sure, who are watching today are readers of Harold Bloom, and we welcome your participation. This is your opportunity to talk directly to him. If you're watching us in the Eastern or Central time zones, 202-585-3890. Those of you out west, Mountain and Pacific time zones, 202-585-3891. And if you'd like to send us an email, we can do that as well. It's booktv@cspan.org. Now, in the Genius book, you asked the question, when did Shakespeare become Shakespeare? Let me ask the same question to you, sort of looking at your own life. When did Harold Bloom become Harold Bloom?
Well, of course, one isn't necessarily dwarfed into less than a pygmy by introducing it with the question of when, you know, the greatest, I would say, of all thinkers as well as all writers, became himself. I don't know that I can answer. Even though I was perfectly happy with the family in which I was the youngest child, I was a sort of fierce reader from the time I was very small. In fact, almost my earliest memories are of sitting on the kitchen floor on Friday mornings when my mother, now so many years gone, of course, would be walking around the kitchen preparing the Sabbath meal for the evening. And I would be reading, and I still remember that occasionally as she walked by, she would rub the top of my head, and sometimes I would reach out and touch her toes, since she tended to be barefoot when she did that. But I couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 at that point. And, you know, I always wanted to read. I still remember obsessive reader as I was when I was 11 or 12 years old. One of my uncles saying to me one day, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I said, well, I don't know, but I guess I would like to teach, you know, reading poems. And he said, well, he said, there are places, sounds like a joke, called Harvard and Yale. I had never heard of them. At that point, he said, where you could be a professor of poetry. And I thought of that back in 1987 to 88, when I was going back and forth at Yale, where I was the Sterling Professor of Humanities, as I still am, and I was being the Charles Eliot Norton Professor of Poetry at Harvard. And one day, as I was being driven back to New Haven, I suddenly remembered what my uncle had said.
Would you talk a little bit about how you read? I've read about it in other places, but it sounds as though you have, can I call it a gift, that most of the rest of us don't have?
I was a complete freak when I was very small, doubtless inherited. I know it's a rather Lamarckian statement that acquired characteristics can be handed on, and the human genome people would disapprove, but I think to this extent, in terms of my own experience, they are wrong. I must have inherited from some Talmudic ancestor or other an amazing reading speed when I was young, and a simply scandalous verbal memory. The reading speed is certainly not the horror it was when I was a little one. It has slowed down to moderate scale now, but the memory, fortunately for me, it has always given me a great advantage as a teacher and reader and writer. The memory has stayed on.
And how quickly did you read at your peak?
Well, my wife the other day, when a very charming fellow, Michael Pakenham of the Baltimore Sun, was up here having lunch with us and interviewing me, after which We saw him down in Baltimore. My wife said that back in the days when we were still courting, since we're about to have a 45th wedding anniversary, this must be about 47 years ago, she was sitting with me in the Yale Library one day, and she suddenly looked up, and she walked over behind me to see what was happening. I was so deeply sunk. And she said, "You were just turning the pages, Harold, and going on to the next one." I did read that quickly then, but not now. And as I say, it was sort of freakish, and it certainly, Susan doesn't testify to any necessary cognitive powers, because I'm always haunted by Jorge Luis Borges' very unsettling story called Funes the Memorious, in which, you know, someone, not quite a village idiot, but still not a person who is altogether there, has a scandalous memory.
Do you remember every book that you've read?
If I want to. I mean, if I didn't like the book, or if it annoyed me, I tend to blot it out. I think I just about do remember all the poems I've ever loved, and indeed large swatches of the prose, though sometimes it does take an effort to bring it back. In fact, I'm sure that one of my friends who are among the genuine people could explain this to me. Just as now, in increasing old age, I have those odd moments when I'm trying to, if it's not a fictive name, it's the name of an actual old friend or a person I've met, I can't necessarily immediately remember it. I draw a blank. And if I let it alone for a few minutes and think about something else, it will suddenly come back at me in the same way sometimes now when I, usually not with verse, but sometimes with prose, when I try directly to sum it up, there's resistance. As Wallace Stevens would have written, there is a conflict, there is a resistance involved, he goes on to say beautifully. And being part is an exertion that declines, and then he adds massively, one feels the life of that which gives life as it is. And I suppose he's writing that in old age, and I suppose that's happening to me now also.
Let's get some callers in our conversation.
Oh, which means this has to be turned up.
That's right.
And I'm not sure I remember how to do that.
We'll take care of that for you.
Oh, thank you.
Jamie, can we help with the earpiece here? And we'll take our very first telephone call. It is from Champaign, Illinois. Go ahead, Champaign. You're on the air.
Thank you for taking
Oh,
my
thank
call.
you.
Professor Bloom, I've enjoyed your
Thank
work
you.
on the Western canon. And one of the writers in there who's a particular favorite of mine, I'd like for you to comment on and talk about a little more. And that's the Canadian Robertson Davies, who's a particular favorite of mine, recently passed away. Thank you.
No, I met him once up in Toronto, a remarkable novelist. I remember the one conversation we had was about the whole question of the ancient heresy, to call it that, which the late Hans Jonas, however, in a wonderful book called The Gnostic, Gnostic, religion. Robertson Davies was very interested in that. He is a first-class novelist. Sometimes, though they're very different, making me think of the late Patrick White of Australia, if only because, well, of course, Patrick White had gotten a Nobel Prize for Literature, hadn't he? And Robertson Davies was never so honored, though he should have been. I'm sorry.
I'd like to pick up with his first comment, that caller, because he said he admired your work on the Western canon.
And I didn't hear him say that.
And that, in fact, is an important area of your scholarship and your contribution that we should define for people who aren't familiar with it.
Oh, it was a book published, I suppose, back around 1994, something like that. A sort of large kind of a book. I see it's down there in that pile somewhere. I guess the first thing to point out is that all a canon ever is a list. And no one, I believe, in the whole tradition of what could be called a canonical tradition of any kind, no one that I know of, except, of course, people who have been defining scriptural, that is to say, religious canons. By the way, I must apologize to the audience. I'm still on so many medications in my long recovery that they produce these unhappy side effects, including a dry mouth and a running nose. So do accept my apology for that. It can't be helped. No one ever intended, except, as I say, those who were making and trying to promulgate scriptural canons, no one ever intended that a list should be definitive or that the canon should be exclusive. It is always an open matter. For me, it's purely a matter of the innate cognitive power and aesthetic beauty of a particular play, poem, novel, or story in relation to other plays, poems, novels, and stories. I guess there are two things I would particularly want to say about them. One is that I'm sorry, and this makes me hopelessly antique, and I'm violating what I quoted from Eliot: these things have served their purpose, let them be. But, you know, the question of the origin of the author, whether gender, sexual orientation, pigmentation, supposed ethnic group, and so on and so forth, is just not of the slightest interest to me. I just want to read what I have in front of me, and then the next point I would always want to make, and this is really why talking about the canon, whatever you define, or a canon, or a tentative or open canon, the whole point is that there's only just so much time to read. There are an infinity of books. One can read all day long, entirely, through a long life, and still not have read everything of real value. It's impossible. The world, I frequently think, it does not get so much worse or better. It just gets older. And there is an extraordinary array of works behind us. So the question then becomes, what shall we read? Because it is always a question of reading something, alas, in preference to something else. And that, I suppose, is what a question of any canon, Western, Eastern, universal, newfangled, old-fangled, has to be about. There's only so much time, as the great critic Walter Pater said. We have an interval, and then our space knows us no more. And the question is, as he says, what shall we fill the interval with? And insofar as we are going to at least partly fill it with reading, the question then becomes, what shall one read? Since, and I would think of it as a question of excluding only in terms of that.
Camarillo, California. Camarillo, you're on the air.
Yes, Professor Bloom. I was curious
Yes.
how you felt about Alexander Solzhenitsyn in your pantheon of authors. And I also was, I'm sorry, go ahead. Thank you.
No, thank you. It is one of my great regrets, and I'm too old now, I think, to learn a new language, that even though my father was born and raised in Odessa before he came first to the United States, first to Britain and then to the United States, he did not want to speak Russian anymore. So we spoke only Yiddish at home. And though I've learned a number of other languages, I've never learned Russian. So I've read him only in translation, and therefore I'm at the mercy of the translations. I've written a little about him. I edited one Chelsea House volume of critical views upon him. I don't know. I sometimes fear, though I say this under correction. It's no stigma, it's no animadversion upon him to say that he is not Tolstoy. I mean, after all, who will be again, or Dostoevsky, or Turgenev, or Chekhov, and so on. But his great interest, I fear, for us was that he was a testimony to the horror of the Stalinist Gulag, the work camps. I don't know. I feel some reservations, reading him in translation, of course. I feel some reservations about him as a creator of character or as a narrative writer. But I say this with diffidence and without great conviction.
Harold Bloom grew up in the Bronx. Our next phone call for him is from Queens, New York.
Oh.
Yes, I'm wondering if there are any young writers that seem to be in the tradition, in the great tradition that you are, aware of, and then also I'm wondering if what do you think of Soren Kierkegaard?
Oh, Kierkegaard is one of the great thinkers, one of the great writers, and one of the authentic sages of religious tradition, broadly defined, and there are works by him like the ironic and beautiful repetition, or the sickness unto death, or the concept of dread, which haunt me all the time. Younger writers, there is, I think, an extraordinary younger American poet, Henri Cole, C-O-L-E, whose most recent book of poems came out quite recently, called Middle Earth. There is the Canadian poet and classicist Anne Carson, now just past 50, who is something like a great, a highly original and learned poet, whose work means a great deal to me. There is Tony Kushner, really an amazing dramatist who cannot be more, I guess, than in his middle 40s. I would hesitate to locate any particular novelist of that generation as yet in the United States or Great Britain. But oddly enough, it seems to me, well, perhaps it's not so odd. I mean, there are such extraordinary novelists in the United States, perhaps just younger than I am, who are very much in their prime. Philip Roth, Thomas Pynchon, Cormac McCarthy, whose frightening and majestic book, Blood Meridian, may well be, I think, the most eminent work by any living American. There's Don DeLillo, there are novelists like Robert Stone and Ed Doctorow. That it's a little difficult at this point for a novelist of the next generation fully to establish herself or himself.
But to the larger question, you have been really critical of our contemporary society since the 70s. And yet, given your criticisms of the state of the universities and the overdose of information from the media, this country is still producing great writers?
Oh, the flaws, intellectually speaking, of this society or culture now are in the media and the universities. They are neither in the imaginative writers nor in the general reading public. This is still a country. I mean, every time I've gone out on the road in behalf of whatever it is I've scribbled in the last 12 or 13 years, including fairly recently in Washington, D.C., and Baltimore, and Boston, and elsewhere, and New York City. I'm immensely moved because there are tens and hundreds of thousands of authentic readers who really do have, I think, marvelous cognitive and aesthetic standards for what it is that they read and want to read. There's a living American poet, John Ashbery, who is a figure who stands, I think, with, alas, great poets who have died. A.R. Ammons, A-M-M-O-N-S, my very close friend Archie Ammons, who died, I guess, less than 2 years ago. James Merrill, who died only a couple of years before that. Elizabeth Bishop, as great a poet as Wallace Stevens or Hart Crane or Robert Frost or Eliot, for that matter. There's been no decline in what I suppose you would want to call American literature or in the American reading public. My complaint is simply with what has happened to the departments of what I would like to still call literature, but they mostly are not, or many of them are not, or only in part are they that. And also, I'm not very happy with the media. I would find it excruciating if I still tried to read the Sunday New York Times Book Review, but I don't try to read it anymore. In fact, I don't think it is to be read. It isn't written, so why should anyone try to read it?
We'll come back to that. Let's hear from a caller in Liberty, Missouri. You're on the air.
Professor Bloom, it's such a pleasure to get a chance to ask you this question. I watched your last interview on C-SPAN with Brian Lamb, and during that interview, you recommended Cormac McCarthy in his book Blood Meridian. I don't read much fiction, but on your recommendation, I picked it up. I'm wondering, could you please comment a little more extensively on what you find so compelling about the book? And in particular, could you talk about some of the characters, for example, like the judge? Thank you.
Well, yes, the judge. Thank you very much. No, it's a very powerful question because the book is of such endless, such endless and really frightening strength. It's a book with which I had a reading experience really unlike any other. When I first tried to read it many years ago, I just had to give up after 50 or 60 pages. The carnage was so great that I could not bear it, and then I tried it a second time, and again, I wasn't strong enough for it, but then it took me over. That is to say, the great character in it, the frightening Judge Holden, who is a kind of American, a 19th century American version of Shakespeare's Iago, and really worthy of being compared to him, which is, of course, an amazing statement to make about a character in a 20th century American novel. The book is a terrifying vision, historically grounded in a very vicious band of freebooters or filibusters led by a really murderous fellow named Glanton, G-L-A-N-T-O-N. And along with him, and another historical character is what you might want to call, it sounds awful to say so, the spiritual leader of this horrible expedition. They have been commissioned by the Mexican and Texan authorities to clear the way to the gold fields in California by simply exterminating all of the Native Americans of the Southwest. And they have a great deal to do with all but, in a kind of, one can hardly even call it a little Holocaust, the Comanches as well as other Native American nations. Judge Holden is a fearful creature, if he is a creature. One isn't quite sure. When you last see him in the book, he is simultaneously fiddling and wildly dancing in a tavern, and he is proclaiming that he will never die. And perhaps indeed he never will die.
Melbourne, Florida is next for Harold Bloom. Welcome to In Depth, caller.
Thank you. It's an honor to talk with you, Professor Bloom.
Thank you.
I've read a little bit of your literary criticism, and I do know that you wrote on the mystical system of the Kabbalah, and I was curious, has any of that system informed your literary criticism in any manner, the thought of that? Also, I have one other question after that.
Well, could we save your long-distance time by getting your second question? I'll make sure it gets answered.
Sure. I'd like if you could make any comment on Emily Dickinson as well.
Certainly. The answer to the first would very much have to do with the two great scholars, the late Gershom Scholem, whom I saw a certain amount of both in Jerusalem and here, and a very close friend, his very eminent successor, though they not totally in sympathy with Scholem, Moshe Idel, I-D-E-L. But they are the two great modern scholars of the tradition, and they have both of them enormously influenced me. Kabbalah is a very complex, I won't say a single method, it's a whole series of methods of interpretation of at times amazing variety and sometimes of really dreadful difficulty. I'm merely an amateur of it. I of course cannot make any contribution whatsoever to the rigorous study of it. I'm simply not qualified, but certainly the writings very freely available in English of Gershom Scholem and Moshe Idel should be consulted. Emily Dickinson is beyond question, with Walt Whitman, still the greatest of all of our country's poets. She also, I would say, unquestionably, and it may be a surprising thing to say about any writer, but I would suppose that except for Shakespeare himself, and with the possible exception of William Blake, Dickinson must really be judged as having about as original and inventive a mind as anyone in the whole of Western literary tradition. She really has thought everything through again for herself. I've been teaching her for decades and decades and decades now. I still remember one of my own teachers here at Yale was the late and much lamented by me William K. Wimsatt, who was a new critic, a close friend and colleague of Clarence Brooks, and another old friend whom I very much miss, Robert Penn Warren. And I remember one day having coffee with William Wimsatt, who was always saying, from the time I was his student back in 1951 on, that I was, as he put it, too Longinian a critic rather than a kind of Aristotelian critic like himself, and he felt that I was much too affective a critic. And I had come in after a 2-hour Dickinson seminar, and I had a violent headache. And he said, "What's wrong with you, Harold? You keep frowning." And I said, "Bill, every time I've just spent 2 hours teaching Emily Dickinson, I get a violent headache because, you know, I've had to sort of work beyond my own cognitive reach." And he shook his head and said, "Well," he said, it serves you right."
Would it be all right to ask you to recite just a bit of Dickinson's verse for us that you could use as an example?
Sure. There is a powerful poem, a late poem, perhaps written after the death of her quite possible lover, in every sense of lover, Judge Otis Lord, who was much older than she was and had been a friend of her late father, which begins, "Because that you are going and never coming back, and I must overlook your track." And then, poor fellow, as well that he didn't survive to read this, it would certainly wither me had I been Lord or whoever this was. She shakes her head and says, "That you who were existence yourself forgot to live." Immensely telling.
Next call for you is from Provo, Utah. You're on for Harold Bloom.
Where I have never been, though I've spent time in Salt Lake City, but I regret not getting out to Brigham Young. But go on, sir.
Sure. Mr. Bloom, are you optimistic at all that there will ever be a return by the universities to an appreciation of literature for aesthetic rather than so-called cultural contributions? Thank you.
Well, I mustn't make things sound worse even than they are. There are many universities and colleges where this kind of transformation of the study of imaginative literature into cultural studies is by no means complete, or in which rather uneasily the two modes live side by side. And, you know, at Yale, for instance, though I can see the inroads, particularly in American studies, which seems to me wholly gone. One of my research assistants last year came in to work with me one day, sort of shaking her head, and I said, "What is it, dear?" And she said, "I just come from a 2-hour seminar on Walt Whitman, which was entirely devoted to the instructor telling us that Walt Whitman was a racist," at which one can only throw up one's hands. I mean, it's abominable and unforgivable, whoever that teacher was. I don't know how to answer your question. I don't think that American undergraduates anywhere are much enthralled by this kind of thing any more than the general public is. The media, I repeat, has been deeply contaminated by it. It does comprise a very considerable portion, and certainly in terms of university and college politics, usually the most active portion of what you might want to call the middle generation of the faculties in most universities and colleges of the English-speaking world. It's actually further gone in Great Britain and in Australia and New Zealand than it is here. Whether it can ever be reversed, I suppose that after my time, after all, I'm going to turn 73, as I said, this coming July, though I hope to go on teaching for quite a while to come if I hold up. I don't suppose that I will live to see this curious mode, as I would call it, being replaced. I think that whole generation will stick to what are, after all, their sincere convictions, however mistaken I regard them as being. And I don't know whether they will have really reproduced themselves or not. The fact that I think undergraduates, I repeat, everywhere are so deeply alienated from these modes may indicate that in time there will be a change, but I can't prophesy.
New York Mills, you are on the air. Is that in New York State?
No, it's outside. It's in upstate New York. Good afternoon, Professor Bloom. My name is Josh McKee.
Good afternoon.
I'm a former student of
yes,
yours from your great poets class at Yale. And
what was your name again, sir?
Josh McKee, M-C-K-E-E.
I think I remember you, sir.
Yes,
I've had by now, I think, more than 30,000 separate students, so sometimes it's hard, but I think I do remember you.
Yes, it was just a couple of years ago. I wanted to ask you to please comment on Ralph Waldo Emerson. You haven't spoken of him too much yet, and in the course...
Yeah, go on.
You had spoken of his relationship to Gnosticism, and I'd be very interested if you could make a few comments on that, please.
This is, as you know, we're coming very close to it. I think it's sometime in later May 26th or so. This will be the bicentenary coming up of Emerson's birth, and I actually wrote something for the English newspaper, The Guardian, which is being published. Is today May the 3rd?
Yes.
It's actually being published today in London, in which I tried to brood about it. I saw a piece, in fact, in today's Sunday Times on the op-ed page, which I did not like at all, on Emerson, essentially blaming him for our current political situation. Emerson is so endlessly varied, and he is in such a curious kind of great-grandfather position in regard to both what you would have to call the American intellectual and cultural left and the right, that both can properly assert that he is the ancestor. That is to say, if on the one hand he was perhaps a dominant influence upon the first Henry Ford, on the other he was certainly the dominant influence upon the philosopher of education, John Dewey. One can find him reverberating still in one of the best minds on the intellectual left that we have today, the philosopher Richard Rorty. He is also, I think, one of the inaugurators of, I once wrote a book about this, which is going to come out again as an anchor book this spring, probably the least understood thing I ever wrote, called The American Religion. But I took the name of that both from a report. One of the founders of Cornell University, Andrew Dixon White, was in the 19th century our ambassador to Russia, and he records a conversation he had with Count Tolstoy, in which the great writer says the Mormon people teach the American religion, which is a very striking and perhaps accurate thing to have said. And my late friend, alas dead now for many years, the superb historian of American religion here at Yale, Sidney Ahlstrom. Sidney, I remember writing in his very useful book, A Religious History of the American People, he actually says at one point that Emerson can really be called the theologian of what might be termed the American religion. Emerson's emphasis, of course, and he left off being a minister in the Unitarian Church. He resigned from it on this basis. He believed wholly in what he called the God within, which he identified very clearly with what he said was best and oldest in every one of us. And that is a notion which perhaps does amount to a kind of American gnosis, G-N-O-S-I-S, even if not quite to an American Gnosticism.
Portland, Oregon, welcome to our discussion with Harold Bloom.
Professor Bloom, it's a great honor to speak to you. You mentioned earlier in your interview that the history of an author is not important to you, but then in your chronology of Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human, you give a few hints about his life. Is it safe to say that you're a
no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to have interrupted you. I just wondered at your use of the word history. The question of the origins of an author is something that, if possible, I like to set aside, if only because of current polemics. But go on with what you were saying. I'm sorry I interrupted.
I'm curious to know if you are, in fact, in the Stratfordian camp.
Oh, God, no. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I guess I'm getting a little tired and confused. Yes. The Oxfordians call it Stratfordian. I was a little shocked by that for a moment. No, some years ago, my good friend Louis Lapham, the editor of Harper's, got me into a symposium, somewhat reluctantly on my part, on the whole Oxfordian controversy. I remain startled that anyone should believe that Shakespeare did not write Shakespeare, though we have those who insist that Aubrey de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, wrote him. We have those who insist that Christopher Marlowe wrote him. We have those who from time immemorial almost have insisted that Sir Francis Bacon wrote him. I can't, in the end, bear any of this nonsense. Indeed, after writing this piece and publishing it in Harper's, I called it a salvo for Lucy Negro, she having been what these days might be called in the current parlance the leading East Indian sex worker of Elizabethan Jacobean London, and by some accounts the Dark Lady of the Sonnets, whether one wants to believe that or not. I said that I would just as soon believe that she had written all of Shakespeare, because unlike the Earl of Oxford, she at least had evidently slept with Shakespeare, at least according to my old acquaintance, the novelist Anthony Burgess, in his quite wonderful novel about Shakespeare called Nothing Like the Sun. But on the whole question of this, I think, nonsense, and I'm sure to get even more poison pen letters now, because I must say these Oxfordians are very virulent, and forgive me for saying this, very crazy people indeed. You know, there is a society in London which keeps sending me its literature, to call it that, which is devoted entirely to proving that all the works of Lewis Carroll were written by Queen Victoria. There's also the Flat Earth Society, whose American founder died only recently. I think there's a great deal in common between those who want to prove that all of Lewis Carroll was written by Queen Victoria, and those who want to go on believing that the earth is indeed flat, and those who desperately want to say that someone, anyone, rather than William Shakespeare, wrote William Shakespeare. But thank you.
Take one more call. It's from Bloomington, Indiana. Then we're going to take a short break. Bloomington, go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm curious how Spenser's Faerie Queene influenced John Milton. Also, another question I have in that vein is, how does Spenser's experiences in Ireland reflect in his work? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Spenser, a very great poet, now alas, much unread, an enormous influence upon Milton. Indeed, Milton, perhaps a little too obligingly, told the poet John Dryden, when Dryden called upon him to get Milton's permission to turn Paradise Lost into rhyming couplets. And Milton evidently, somewhat ironically, gave his permission to Dryden. But Dryden says that on that occasion, Milton said to him that Spencer was my great original. And there is an enormous influence, certainly, of The Faerie Queene and of Spencer's so-called minor poems. They would be immensely major poems by any standard. Indeed, I never get the epithalamian, most majestic of marriage songs out of my inner ear.
Can you give us a bit of it?
Oh. There's only time for the first stanza, but I remember reciting it to myself the morning of my own wedding, 45 years ago this coming week. Ye learned sisters, which have oftentimes been to me aiding others to adorn, whom ye thought worthy of your graceful rhymes, that even the greatest did not greatly scorn to hear their names mirrored in thy lays, but joyed in their praise. And when ye list your own mishaps to mourn, which death or love or fortune's wreck did raise, your string could soon to sadder tenor turn, and teach the woods and waters to lament your doleful juraments. Now lay all those sorrowful complaints aside, and having all your heads with garlands crowned, help me mine own love's praises to resound. Now let the same of any be envied, so Orpheus did for his own bride. So I unto myself alone will sing, the woods shall to me answer, and my echo ring.
And on that note, we're going to take just a very short break. We're spending 3 hours talking with Harold Bloom from his home. He shares with his wife, Jean, in New Haven, Connecticut. And we'll be back with 2 more hours of conversation in just a couple minutes.
What do you think this thing is about always wanting to be with other people?
Well, I was never alone when I was a child. We were a family of 7 crowded into 4 rooms. and they weren't large rooms. And certainly before I got married, I was very solitary. I don't know. I don't think it's the fear of mortality. I believe fiercely, as I say in the book you're holding, that one of the major reasons why we do read and should read is because we cannot possibly know enough people or know them closely enough. But I suppose, though I have been married for 42 years and have known the lady for 44 years, and she is the best company there is, I suppose something in me is unappeased and peregrine, as Mr. Eliot says in one of his poems. Strange person for me to quote, as he's not one of my favorite writers. I suppose my spirit is always somehow looking for something, but that's what being a reader is about, I would think. And that's what I am primarily. I mean, I'm a professional teacher. I'm a professional literary critic, a very old-fashioned one. I now call myself at times, partly in self-deprecation, but partly, I suppose, with a certain fury, Bloom Brontosaurus Bardolator. That is to say, not only a worshipper of Shakespeare, but a Brontosaurus, a dinosaur. Reading at the Melrose branch of the Bronx Public Library when I was still so small, I couldn't carry the books home. My three sisters, much older, kindly carried them for me, and I went from the Melrose branch of the Bronx Public Library, after I'd read through it, to the Fordham branch of the Bronx Library, which is its research branch, and I used that up. And I descended at 15, clutching my nickels in my hand for the subway, to the 42nd Street Library, determined to read through that in the main reading room, and of course I would never have succeeded. But soon enough, I was a Cornell undergraduate, having won a fellowship, and spent 4 years trying to read out that library, and for the last 46 years have been trying to read out the Yale Library, which no human being can read through, though I've done what I could. But it worries me deeply what is happening to our public libraries, to our library systems in general. They used to receive much more government funding than they receive now, and I do not hear anyone in either party running for office this time talking about public libraries except to, out of the shibboleth, more and better computers, you know, one computer per child. You know, I'm tired of being tarred. I've been voting for Democrats for president or for socialists when I could find them for, let's see, I started when I was 18. I mean, here I've been voting for 52 years, and I've never voted for a Republican for dog catcher, and I wouldn't start now. I forgive all the Republicans out there, or let them forgive me. I'm not a conservative. I'm anything but a conservative. I think that the United States has been almost destroyed by Ronald Reagan and his legacy. He came into office, that charming, smiling fellow, and he assured us we could all emancipate our selfishness, and that is what we have proceeded to do on a national level. And I think we have done terrible things to the poorer people in this country. And Mr. Clinton, whom I voted for twice, nevertheless signed the welfare bill and put 5 million more children under the poverty line. Let it be said in his defense that I gather he has done everything he could to partly make up for this, you know, as best he could, but still, I am not happy with him. No, I don't think this is a political difference. I don't even think this is a cultural difference, because I don't think there can be cultural differences in that sense. It's an intellectual difference and an aesthetic difference. And though I hate to use the term because it can so easily be misconstrued in a religion-mad country like the United States, it ultimately has to be a spiritual difference. Either you believe that reading and teaching and thinking about the best that has been thought and written and said matters and does everyone a great deal of good, or you do not. And most of these people now in the universities, and certainly these people in the media and the New York Times, don't believe that at all.
And that's a live picture from New Haven, Connecticut. We are on location at the home of Harold Bloom for this month's In-Depth program, and we're beginning hour 2 in his living room inside, where we're surrounded by books, a central part of Harold Bloom's life as a critic, teacher, prolific reader himself, and writer of, have you counted them recently? How many books you've published?
I think I counted because Andrew of your group asked me to count. It turned out to be 28.
And you're working on 2 more right now?
Yeah, I guess so.
I'm going to plunge right back into questions because
Yes,
we
please.
have so many callers
Yes,
for you.
please.
Santa Barbara, California, you're on the air.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Bloom. My name is Willie, and I almost changed my question because I just showed a clip of you in a previous book notes and concerning conservatives. But could you reflect on the recent passing of Mr. Moynihan? And he seemed to have an ability to elevate some of his political thinking with a deep literary sensibility. And, you know, there's obviously some famous examples. Lincoln was a great writer and had a great literary sensibility and a great love of Shakespeare, and a lot of his thinking was informed by that. And there are other examples. And could you, comment on the current absence or lack of, or any reasons behind that? And just your thoughts on that.
Well, you know, I don't feel that I have any particularly valuable insights into any questions of national politics or statecraft or war. I'm just, you know, another citizen in that regard. I think there obviously has been a kind of decline in what I would certainly regard as older modes of cultural literacy in high places in the United States government, and I'm afraid in the Congress also. But I just don't feel that I'm qualified to say very much about that. I'm sorry.
Let me turn the question around, and that is our current president, George W. Bush, and the previous administration, both experience on the Yale campus. Do you have any personal recollections of either the Clintons or of George W. Bush?
No, I do not. So there really is nothing I can say.
Elizabeth City, North Carolina, go ahead.
Hi. I wondered if you could maybe comment a little bit on the character of Shylock from The Merchant of Venice. There's been a recent trend to try to portray the character and the play in a more positive light, I think, in both productions and in teaching, and I wondered if you could maybe comment on that.
Well, thank you. It's, alas, too good a question. I'm certainly not part of that trend, though there are immense puzzles as to what Shakespeare was indeed up to with Shylock, who clearly, to some degree, is perhaps the first major character in Shakespeare to somehow get away from Shakespeare. I think the enormous examples of that would be Falstaff and then Hamlet, who is so amazing a representation that he seems to have an existence totally independent of Shakespeare and the play. What intrigues me the most, it's always a problem. I mean, I teach The Merchant of Venice annually here at Yale, and the problem that I try to confront with my students, or have them confront, is why did Shakespeare, quite gratuitously, it was no part of the pound of flesh tradition, it's not in any of his sources, why did he put Shylock through an enforced conversion towards the close of the fourth act? And why, having had Antonio, who is after all the Merchant of Venice, state this to the Duke or Doge of Venice as the condition, or a major condition, of Shylock's survival, why does Shylock consent sort of instant baptism. It destroys any dramatic consistency, and there has been a great deal until then, a formidable degree of it in Shylock's character. It is impossible to be persuaded that the figure whom Shakespeare has been giving us for 4 acts would show consent to mere survival when it means becoming a Christian. I have never seen an adequate explanation from any Shakespearean critic, and I cannot provide one myself, as to why Shakespeare did that. It is, after all, Portia's play. It is meant to be Portia's play. It is meant to be, and is, certainly in that ecstatic 5th act, from which, of course, Shylock is necessarily excluded, it is a high romantic comedy, and an extraordinary and exuberant and successful one. Well, what we are to make of Shylock, I'm not sure that anyone quite knows. Perhaps Shakespeare set out with the notion that, like the Barabbas of Marlowe's The Jew of Malta, Shakespeare was to be a kind of farcical villain, a sort of comic villain. But of course, he is not that at all. And he most certainly is a villain. You know, the first time I ever saw The Merchant of Venice, my sisters took me frequently to the old Yiddish theaters on 2nd Avenue when I was a boy in the later 30s and the very early 40s. And I can never forget the first Merchant of Venice I ever saw, which was in Yiddish translation. I believe that Maurice Schwartz himself, the major tragic actor of the 2nd Avenue Yiddish Theater in those days, in succession to Jacob Adler, a great legend who was, however, before my time. I believe that Schwartz, perhaps with assistance from others, had translated the play into Yiddish. His Shylock, of course, is not Shakespeare's Shylock, but it hovers in my head every time I see or read or teach the play. Towards the end of the 4th act, there is Shylock, scalpel in hand, approaching the quite sensibly and properly shrinking Antonio, in Schwartz's version, the one I first saw, as I said, to cut off his pound of flesh in what, after all, would be a very grisly slaughter indeed. And suddenly, and Schwartz was a very considerable melodramatic actor, so he certainly riveted all attention in the theater, my own youthful eyes with the rest, upon him. Suddenly, an enormous shudder passes through him, and he drops the knife and cries out in a piercing voice, "Ich bin doch ein Yid," that is to say, but after all, I am Jewish. And he will not do it. And of course, the audience rose and cheered, but they were purely a Jewish, indeed a Yiddish audience. That is certainly not the Shylock of William Shakespeare. But as to precisely who or what Shakespeare's Shylock is, I still cannot answer.
Chicago is next in our conversation with Harold Bloom.
Yes, Professor Bloom, good afternoon, and thank you for revisiting C-SPAN. I'm curious about your assessment of a growing trend in higher education, namely the proliferation of courses and entire undergraduate and graduate degrees which are available online over the internet.
Well, I don't really know very much about this. I am told that Yale is involved with several other universities in a sort of consortium collaborating on this. I have so little information about it, and I have not thought about it at all, so that I'm sorry, I just cannot be of much help, sir.
Have you ever been on the internet yourself?
No. Have I? Yes, I suppose in publicizing one book or another, I have been put online with an interlocutor between myself and people sending in email, but I have no clear memories of it.
Wilmington, North Carolina. Good morning, or good afternoon to you.
Hi, how are you folks doing? Hope you're doing well.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for taking your time this afternoon. I have two brief questions. I'm a young poet writing in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I really believe heartily in the importance of memorization. And
as I passionately join you in doing, yes.
As I could certainly have been able to, as I've certainly been able to tell from the past hour or so, it's really been wonderful. I was wondering if first you could briefly speak to the young writers out there about the importance of memorization, especially in such kind of a fast food, quick culture. And then I'm just curious, are there any contemporary poets that you read for pleasure these days?
Caller, before he answers, is poetry a vocation or avocation for you?
Both. I lecture in English at a state college here in North Carolina, and I also teach English at a small tech college. And I'm just starting to have some fair national lit magazine publications myself.
Thanks for calling.
My friend John Hollander, a few years back, a very fine poet indeed, and wonderful literary scholar, particularly of the Renaissance, did a very good anthology called Possessed by Memory, in which he offers, I believe it was 100 really very good poems that are very apt for memorization. I used to, in many of the courses that I taught here at Yale, try to get groups, both of graduate and undergraduate students, to sort of join me in experiments in possession by memory, in which I would urge them never, of course, to memorize anything by rote, but, you know, to read and reread, say, Tennyson's Ulysses, very great dramatic monologue, which is very available, I think, for such possession, you know, to read it out loud to themselves or to others so many times that finally they did begin to possess it for themselves. But then I got shy of it and felt, well, it was perhaps an imposition upon the students on my part. I wish I hadn't gotten shy of it. Perhaps now, in brazen old age, I will return to it if my students will tolerate it. But thank you.
You actually write in the introduction, I believe it is to, well, I won't say because I read so many introductions in various books, but you describe as a child memorizing poetry and then running through the streets reciting out loud the poetry.
Yes, I'm afraid that my poor neighbors, perhaps rightly, considered me somewhat mad, somewhat insane. But I was, you know, I was so intoxicated with it. I was drunk on it. And of course, was making a spectacle of myself. I don't do that anymore. I tend, unless I'm absolutely alone, outdoors or indoors. I must say I had an odd experience. I had this open heart operation somewhere between 6 and 7 months ago, and was a very long time recovering from this three-way bypass, indeed. As is, I think, customary with so invasive an operation, the aftermath involved a great deal of profound depression on my part, which is, I guess, not to be avoided. And part of the problem, as they told me, was that in the trauma of the operation, as does so frequently happen, my heart had gone into a very irregular rhythm indeed, and they couldn't correct it until I'd spent a certain amount of time on medication. And about 2 months ago, after they'd brought me into the Yale New Haven Hospital again for 3 or 4 days and nights, and knocked me out at one point for an hour and a half, and with this rather interesting electrified paddle, I believe, which they actually press on your heart front and back, they had restored a heartbeat, and I still felt rather miserable when my wife kindly took me home that weekend. But early the next week at one point, when she was out of the house, I suppose it was simply because physiologically I had a regular heartbeat again, I suddenly, after so many months of feeling miserable, felt alive and well. And without even realizing that I was doing it, I went and stood over there in that doorway, and for about an hour and a half or so, until my wife came home, I simply chanted quite exultantly a great many of my favorite poems out loud to myself. Seems to me now an odd kind of moment, but certainly worth, for my own sake, recalling that, because it does remind me of what a good thing it is to return to life.
Woodside, California, for Harold Bloom. Good afternoon.
Hi, Professor Bloom. Thanks for this time. I'm very curious where you place Thomas Pynchon in American writing, particularly Gravity's Rainbow and V.
Pynchon may or may not be a novelist, but that's because he is something larger and more wonderful even than a great novelist. He writes epic sagas almost without parallel. It would be very difficult to compare any single figure, except perhaps the Cormac McCarthy of Blood Meridian, to him, though. Certainly Philip Roth and Don DeLillo are major novelists. Gravity's Rainbow is a superb work. One brief section of it, the story of Byron the light bulb, I never got out of my head or heart. It is so wonderful, about a light bulb named Byron, wonderful name for him, after no doubt Lord Byron, George Gordon Lord Byron, the remarkable romantic poet and personality of the early 19th century. Byron is a light bulb who is programmed by R.G. Farben or whatever to burn out. And he defies this system by simply refusing to burn out. And they punish him in various ways. He ends up, poor light bulb, in the bathroom of a rather low-grade bordello, I believe it's in Hamburg, still burning on resolutely, but rather miserably. V and Gravity's Rainbow seem to me less as achievements than the extraordinary early novel which came between those two books, The Crying of Lot 49, which is a superb shot out of hell, as it were, and a book I cannot reread too often, or after a rather unfortunate book called, I think it was Vineland, which I could barely believe was by Pynchon. An immense return to his full dazzlement in the great book called Mason and Dixon. I would think his finest single achievement, but thank you.
Since you're returning to the classroom in the fall for after a year's absence for health, what course will you be first teaching?
I will go back resolutely, and I will teach. I collapsed upstairs shaving on September the 4th, a Wednesday, when I was supposed to go into Yale and teach my first Shakespeare class of the year. I'll teach a course that goes through the year for undergraduates on all of Shakespeare. Or you can, of course, get all in, even in 26 sessions or so, so it will be perhaps 24 of the 38 or so plays, the 24 that seemed to me most extraordinary. And then in the fall term, I'll give a undergraduate seminar on really how to read a poem. And in the spring, a mixed graduate and undergraduate course on major American poets, and at NYU in the autumn term, a graduate course on trying to bring together my sense of what literary criticism might be with a series of modern American poets.
Do you still have to prepare for these courses?
No, my wife pointed out to me a few years ago that whenever I prepared too intensively, I would come home shaking my head, very unhappy indeed, because I felt the classes had gone very badly. You know, since I have by heart, in every sense I think of having by heart, though the term now troubles me after all my recent problems with my heart, in the physiological sense and the clinical sense. No, I seem best off. I mean, I always reread, of course, the Shakespearean play or the particular poem, be it by Whitman or Dickinson or Wallace Stevens or Hart Crane or John Ashbery, that I'm going to be teaching. But I seem, I don't know what sort of a teacher I am anyway. I guess one reason why I really want to go on is because quite clearly there are very inadequate things in my performance as a teacher. I'm not very good at encouraging class discussion and helping it carry itself along. I still have the old Talmudical habit of asking questions and then answering them by my own questions and doing it too quickly. So I hope I can slow myself down and learn to listen a little better. I think I have been, I don't know whether I would say sobered or humbled or whatever, but I think I'm undergoing a change because of this. I mean, it's been a bad year. It started with terrible arthritic attacks, and then there was this dreadful bleeding ulcer in September, which turned out to be a fortunate thing because they discovered that I was not going to last more than a few weeks unless they indeed replaced all the arteries that carry blood down to the heart. But it has obviously changed me in ways that I don't fully understand as yet. Indeed, a couple of friends who are very good physicians have pointed out to me that it really does take 8 to 10 months, sometimes a year, after a really invasive operation of any kind before the trauma is really gone. But never mind.
Let me give you this call from Naperville, Illinois. Thanks for waiting, caller. You're on the air.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to ask if the professor could discuss the influence of Hindu spirituality on Emerson and the Transcendentalists.
Of Pindar?
No, Hindu spirituality.
Oh, Hindu. I'm so sorry for mishearing you, because I wouldn't have known what to answer about the sublime writer of odes, Pindar. There is a considerable influence in translation, of course, of Hindu scriptures and indeed of also Persian literature, Persian poetry. First upon Goethe in Germany, in his old age, who wrote marvelous poems in the Chinese and in the Persian mode. And then Emerson and Thoreau, who were deeply imbued with by contemporary translations of the major Hindu scriptures. I must admit that it's an aspect of transcendentalism that I myself understand very imperfectly indeed, though I have tried to read in translations, of course, Hindu scriptures as well as the major Buddhist scriptures, I never have the sense that I really achieve a useful understanding of them. I'm just not able to accomplish that. So I'm afraid I can't be of any help.
We're halfway through a 3-hour conversation with Harold Bloom. We are live from his home in New Haven, Connecticut, just about 3 floor blocks from the Yale campus. And we're going to continue taking your telephone calls. The next is from Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Hello, Professor Bloom. Great pleasure to talk to you.
Hello. Hello, sir.
I was curious about a story that was in the New York Times several weeks ago that you'd given your library and papers to St. Michael's College in Vermont. And you mentioned that you thought that Catholic schools carried on the Western literary tradition better than some. And a related question, I was wondering if any of the Catholic authors of the last century, people like Flannery O'Connor or Graham Greene, will be legitimately considered great in the Western tradition.
Okay, thanks. I will take those in order. Before you answer the St. Michael's College, we have a little bit of video because people can see that we are just surrounded by books here on this first floor. But you referenced earlier that you work on the 3rd floor, and we have some video that we took up there just so people can see how many books you have in this house and some of what will be going to St. Michael's College when you transfer. Why St. Michael's?
I'm just fascinated, forgive me, by seeing my study like that. I don't know that anyone has sort of gone into it before like that. There are a number of reasons. I have an honorary degree from St. Michael's. I have a former student whom I enormously value there, now emeritus, Professor John Rice, very devoted scholar teacher of American literature, someone whom I've loved since he was a child, Nathaniel Lewis, the son of my, alas, recently deceased friend, the superb scholar of American literature, R.W.B. Lewis, Dick Lewis. We've always been very close to him, to his wife Nancy, and to the 3 children. But I had been thinking, it won't be immediate, of course, that they have to build an addition to their library, though they, I think, have now received part of the money that they, from an anonymous donor among their alumni, so they'll be able to start the process. But I suppose in 5 to 7 years it will exist, and sort of gradually one can transfer all but a sort of working part of my library to them. It would be, I think, purely gratuitous to offer one's personal library to Yale University, which has one of the 4 great libraries in the United States, together with Harvard, the Library of Congress, and the major library at 42nd Street, the New York Public Library in New York, or indeed even to offer it to my original alma mater, Cornell University, because, perhaps a few hundred of the books could be housed there because they are rare books, or join the rare books that they have. But most of them would be of no use or interest to them. But to a place which is a small place with a relatively small library, like St. Michael's, which does, like a number of, I by no means know that this is all, but a number of, certainly Notre Dame University and the Catholic University of America, where I know something about the teaching of literature, have maintained very high standards. Again, I would say aesthetic and cognitive in the teaching of literature. So has St. Michael's, a small place. So I just thought it would be more useful to put it there and to...
His second questions were on Flannery O'Connor and Graham Greene and their critical future.
Flannery O'Connor is clearly a writer for the ages, deeply disquieting, and at times very scary and surprising writer. But
how old was she when she died of lupus? Right?
Yeah, of lupus. I don't think she had reached 40 years old, to the best of my my knowledge.
And she was writing in what period of time?
Oh, this would have been, if I have it right, I may have it wrong now, surely back in the 1940s and 50s. I cannot recall when she died. But the two novels, Wise Blood and the even more disconcerting and immensely rewarding novel, The Violent Bear It Away, are permanent achievements. And as a story writer, she rivals Ernest Hemingway in modern American fiction. She does not resemble him at all, of course, since she is quite passionately Southern Gothic, and indeed defended being in that kind.
And how about Graham Greene?
I must admit to imperfect sympathies there. I've read at one time or another a vast quantity of Graham Greene. The early novel called Brighton Rock I found very impressive, a kind of throwback to Jacobean tragedy, to John Webster or Cyril Turner or John Ford, and a very striking and memorable book. Certainly there are some short stories that are very fine, but I did not know how I felt about the still very impressive book, The Power and the Glory, about a fugitive Mexican priest in post-revolutionary Mexico. Though it is a very serious and I just felt equivocal about it. Much of Greene leaves me feeling very mixed, but that can be a purely subjective kind of reaction. But certainly Brighton Rock rises above any qualms. I guess I don't like the end of the affair, which seems to me contrived and somehow theologically tendentious. If St. Augustine, very great mind, very great reader, very great teacher of how to read, if St. Augustine is tendentious, one says, well, of course, and one is still immensely grateful for the experience of rereading him continually. But when Graham Greene is tendentious, that is to say, when he has too clear a design upon the reader, I do become very uneasy.
Washington, D.C., you're on for Harold Bloom. Good afternoon.
Mr. Bloom, Miss Swain, how are you?
Hello, sir.
My favorite poem is very short. Real eyes, realize, realize. I have no idea who wrote that. But Socrates told us...
That was the three words. The three
realize.
words.
Realize. The word realize.
R-E-A-L-I-Z-E.
First one is real eyes. Eyes that are real.
Oh, real eyes. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Eyes that are real. Realize. Real. Lies. I just wanted to share that with you. I have no idea who wrote that.
I have no idea either.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, Washington. Wheatland, Wyoming is next. Hello, Wheatland, Wyoming.
This
there?
morning that I was going to have a chance to talk to Professor Bloom, I would have said that's ridiculous. But my question is concerning Hamlet. At the end of the third act, last scene, Gertrude responds to Hamlet right after he has killed Polonius with the line, as kill a king. And as kill a king ends with an exclamation point, at least in my text. Every actress I have heard do this performance says it as a question. What could you add to that? I really have questioned that for some time.
I find what you're saying surprising. I remember that Hamlet says, "As kill a king and marry with my mother." Though I may have that wrong now also. I may be getting confused, but that doesn't sound quite right to me, sir.
Some more questions about Shakespeare. These are some of the emails we've received.
Yes,
Mr. Bloom, I've read, many of your Shakespeare writings and enjoy them very much. I was wondering what your opinion is on Shakespeare movies. Most recently, Shakespeare in Love that won Best Picture and Kenneth Branagh's movies and others in recent years.
Shakespeare in Love was a...
Do you go to see these films?
I did see Shakespeare in Love simply because somebody came to the house with a tape of it. A young woman, I think, from either Time or Newsweek. It certainly is a delightful film with sort of obvious limitations, but then Tom Stoppard, I believe, was one of the script writers, and it has something of his verve and wonderful wit. I don't know what to make of the Branagh movies. He has enormous intensity as an actor. I'm not quite sure that I can fully recognize any of the plays in what he does. I remember a few years ago being at the 92nd Street Y with a very distinguished English literary critic, a Manxman indeed, Sir Frank Kermode, and that someone in the audience asked this, and I said, well, I really thought that the Akira Kurosawa films, Ron, I believe it's called, which is his version of King Lear, and Throne of Blood, I think it was called in English, which is his very striking version of Macbeth, somehow struck me as more authentically Shakespearean than any other film Shakespeare I had seen, at which Sir Frank observed somewhat mordantly that I didn't seem to care that nothing of Shakespeare's language could possibly appear in such films, and I agreed that Sir Frank had scored a splendid point upon me, but nevertheless I stuck to it and still stick to it. Somehow Kurosawa seemed to me to be closer to the heart of the matter, to use that Graham Greenian phrase, somewhat ironically, than any other film Shakespeare that I've seen.
Next call is from Laurel, Maryland.
Hi. There's so many questions I'd love to ask the professor about academic politics and the profession, but if I only get one question, I think I'd rather make it about books, and that would be...
Yeah, please let us stick to books. As I said before, quoting T.S. Eliot, these things have served their purpose. Let them be.
I agree.
Go on.
My question would be about Scott Fitzgerald, where his reputation stands, and even more to the point...
About who?
Scott Fitzgerald.
I'm so sorry, but just... Oh, Francis, yes, Scott Fitzgerald, yes, of course.
I guess I'd like to know your thoughts on his influences, particularly since you're so important in the area of anxiety of influence.
There are a great many powerful influences on Scott Fitzgerald, who's Great Gatsby. I mean, one is happy to concur with the common reader, as Dr. Johnson says, is magnificent short novel that time does not in any way stale or dim, and the best of whose short stories, like the infinitely sad Babylon Revisited, always stay with me also, and I would think with most readers. There's a lot of Joseph Conrad in Scott Fitzgerald, as there is, of course, also in Hemingway and in the greatest figure of that generation, or surely of all of modern American literature, William Faulkner. I mean, just as I said earlier that if I had to vote for a single work by a living American, it would be Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. If I had to think of the last century, a single work by an American, it would be Faulkner's short novel, As I Lay Dying. Conrad's use of the mediating narrator, whom he so frequently calls Marlowe without an E at the end of it, M-A-R-L-O-W, is brilliantly modulated and picked up on by Scott Fitzgerald in Nick Carraway, who relates Gatsby's story to us. And of course, the rhetorical effect of T.S. Eliot's poetry, particularly of The Wasteland, is very strong upon the great Gatsby. So is a very different poet indeed, and of course, an infinitely greater one. I don't say that out of even my admittedly ambivalent reaction to Eliot's poetry, but John Keats, whose Ode to a Nightingale, which is of course utilized for the wonderful title of that sort of mixed success as a book, Tender is the Night. Keats's odes are always being echoed quite deliberately in Scott Fitzgerald. I guess that's what I could say at the moment. Thank you.
Back to Shakespeare. This is an email from a viewer named Carl Rich, who writes, you are one of my favorite contemporary authors. I have one shelf devoted to your books. My question for you is, are you Hamlet or are you Falstaff?
Oh, well, I have recently lost 55 pounds. I would never dream of trying to play Hamlet, nor would anyone be foolish enough to let me do it. I must lose another 50-odd pounds, but that I think will take about a year. Some years ago, I actually did, thanks to the kindness of a wonderful Shakespearean director and a close friend, Karen Coonrod, C-O-O-N-R-O-D, and of my old friend Robert Brustein. I actually did play Falstaff at the American Repertory Theater up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We took the two parts of Henry IV. There's actually a photograph of it.
I think we're going to get that in just a second.
Somewhere. That is the greatest of all actors that I've ever seen. That is Sir Ralph Richardson, whose Falstaff I saw back in 1946 or 47, and it has never ceased to be an overwhelming influence on me. I think I played Falstaff more briefly twice. Alas, one is neither Falstaff nor Hamlet. Here's Eliot coming to haunt me again, winning his own triumph over me, from the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, undoubtedly a great poem. No, I am not Prince Hamlet, no, is meant to be. I'm an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two. Thank you.
Next telephone call for Harold Bloom is from Los Angeles. Good afternoon to you, caller.
Because I'm afraid I won't ever get back on.
Right, me too.
I think they have to sort it out.
Caller, are you there?
Hello, hi.
You are on the air right now.
Hi.
We have two people on the line.
Hi, I'm calling from New York City, and my question regards British and American women poets of the last 2 centuries. It seems like there have been so many extraordinary American poets, Dickinson and Bishop and Swenson and Marianne Moore, and so many, and not so
certainly
many.
Four great poets. I would add the late Amy Clampitt, who was a poet of amazing achievement.
And perhaps Anne Carson,
there is, as I said earlier, the Canadian Anne Carson, who is as good as they come now.
And your question, caller?
Is, if you had any thoughts about why there seems to be a dearth of great British women poets.
from the same period.
Well,
and then the other thing I
from
would
the
love to
same
hear
period.
what Anne Carson's precursor is, and then I'll hang up and listen.
Well, Miss Carson, very clearly, she brings them into her poetry, very clearly has a strong relationship both to Emily Dickinson and to Emily Bronte, both the Bronte of Wuthering Heights, but the very fine lyric and meditative poems of Emily Bronte. It's an interesting question that you ask. I am not much moved by the poetry of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, even though she is very strongly put forward by feminist literary critics these days. Christina Rossetti, though, is, I think, a major poet, particularly a great devotional poet by any legitimate standards. I find myself rereading her all the time. I don't know why. I mean, one thinks of the major modern British poets. I mean, there are the Irish poets, of course. One thinks of the whole succession from William Butler Yeats through Seamus Heaney on to others. A very strong tradition indeed. There is the poetry of Thomas Hardy. There was Edward Thomas, who, when he was really much too old for it, went and got himself killed in the First World War, thus cutting off an immense potential. There were two great younger poets killed in the First World War, Wilfred Owen and Isaac Rosenberg. And of course, there is alive and now living in this country, Geoffrey Hill. But I cannot account for why there does not seem to me to be a major modern British or Irish poet who happens to be a woman.
Here's a question from a viewer named King, S. King. Do you think great writers must be prolific, or do those who have one great story to tell, can they fall into that category?
Well, Ralph Waldo Emerson at one point says, only write a dozen lines and rest on your oars forever. And there are indeed poets remembered for the one poem, simply because that one poem is surpassing enough, so we cannot get rid of it. I suppose, in a way, I want to change the question. Sometimes what puzzles and fascinates me most about Shakespeare is that while, insofar as they are comparable writers, one would have to think of Dante, Cervantes, Chaucer, Tolstoy. They all go on in their old age. They, as Cervantes says, they remain in the stirrup. But Shakespeare, who dies just about on his 52nd birthday, does not seem to have written a line in the last 3.5 years of his life. He collaborates on The Two Noble Kinsmen with his replacement in his company, John Fletcher. And then he will not write anything more. Until then, he had been, of course, immensely prolific, 38 or so plays in just 25 years. Indeed, there is one other thing in Shakespeare what always stuns me. In 14 consecutive months, he wrote King Lear, Macbeth, and Antony and Cleopatra. I can't understand that. I can't I can't somehow get around that. It just seems superhuman. It seems impossible that someone should have been able to do that, but he did. Thank you.
Staten Island, New York, as we begin our third hour with Harold Bloom.
Mr.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, let's just go straight on.
Go straight on?
Yes.
All right.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm so sorry, dear. Yes,
Can
go
you
on.
comment on G.K. Chesterton, please?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. One of my favorite literary critics and one of my favorite writers in general. The Man Who Was Thursday is a great prose romance, which I reread nearly every year. But Chesterton was also, I think, just about a great literary critic. To this day, his books on Dickens, on Robert Browning, certainly those two, and some others seem to me as good, certainly, as anyone has done at any length on Charles Dickens or Robert Browning. A great, of course, controversialist, also an exuberant writer to every degree, a wonderful poet in that great rollicking battle poem, Lepanto, which has a marvelous vision in it of Cervantes there on deck in the great sea fight where one of those rare rivals to Shakespeare was maimed forever.
As you're thinking about it, because people who have joined us in progress haven't heard you recite poetry, why don't you give us a little bit of that one?
I would want to chant the whole thing. It's a narrative poem, and it's not primarily lyrical. I don't think it would work, and I wouldn't know where to break off. I never get out of my head Chesterton's wonderful ballad about Noah, who is, of course, drunk on deck, and the refrain of the poem is, "I don't care where the water goes if it doesn't get into the wine," which is, I think, one of the great lines in 20th century English poetry. But I'll pass on that for now.
Danville, Virginia, good afternoon.
Hi, Dr. Bloom. It's an honor to talk with such a distinguished lover of words.
Thank you.
And much health to you. This country needs you as long as possible. My question has to do with, growing up in a...
Very kind of you indeed. I feel that I myself and my wife need me for as long as possible, but it's very kind of you to use that outrageous hyperbole, but thank you.
Growing up in the Bible Belt, I read the Bible twice before I was 15, and then I was introduced to Julius Caesar in the 9th grade, and I thought, this guy uses the same language, but much better. And my question to you is, do you think that there's any kind of difference between the inspiration for so-called spiritual literature and so-called regular creative writing? And is all spiritual literature just a kind of a worshiping of characters from the Bhagavad Gita on?
I assume, sir, that you grew up with the King James or authorized version of the Bible.
Yes, sir.
Most of which was written by, except for Geoffrey Chaucer, I would think someone who comes closest to being authentically of Shakespeare's greatness. That is William Tyndale, Tyndale, who is the principal translator, though there's also Miles Coverdale, Coverdale, very eminent also. I'm not quite sure that I would agree that even Shakespeare could write more powerfully than William Tyndale. In Tyndale's Bible, in his version of the story of Joseph, unfortunately it vanishes in King James, even though they use so much of Tyndale. There's a wonderful sentence, "And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a lucky fellow." which is superb and worthy of Shakespeare. The Hebrew Bible and the Greek New Testament, and certainly of all translations, the line of translations that goes from Tyndale to the group who put together the authorized version is certainly the only work in Western tradition, though there's also, of course, the Quran, which is a very extraordinary work indeed, which has a unique advantage. I cannot think of any other book which is like this. One hears only the voice of the God in it. Literally no one else speaks except God, and that is quite a recitation. You know, the famous desert island question. Someone once asked James Joyce if on a desert island and you could have only the one book, what would it be? And he replied famously, and I think this is verbatim, I should like to answer Dante, but I would have to take the Englishman because he is richer. Wonderful word to use there, and of course he means Shakespeare rather ruefully, and of course from an Irish point of view he is being charmingly and wittily resentful of Shakespeare's priority, though certainly in Finnegan's Wake he does, I think, as much with countering the influence of Shakespeare as any writer in the language has been able to do. If I were asked the desert island question, it would be very hard to know. I mean, the answers would have to be, you know, the complete Shakespeare, the complete Hebrew Bible and Greek New Testament, whether in the original or either in Tyndale's or the authorized version, certainly Dante, certainly Cervantes. Very hard, ultimately, to choose.
Manteca, California viewer wants to know, do you think that there are any nonfiction writers, either now or in the past, who match with the best writers of literature?
Well, there is a powerful critical tradition in English, which includes, of course, Dr. Samuel Johnson, William Hazlitt in the Age of High Romanticism, that is to say, the time of Wordsworth and Shelley. I am myself addicted to the criticism and to the prose of the great aesthetic critic Walter Pater. There is Emerson, overwhelmingly, in American literature, the great American essayist, certainly, and a disciple of the greatest of all essayists, Montaigne. It's a difficult question to answer. There are great masterpieces of history in English. There is Gibbon's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which, of course, is in a melancholy way in the mind of many of us these days as we worry about this rather imperial moment in the history of the United States and what it may or may not presage. There is David Hume, of all philosophers in English, the one who writes most powerfully, and of course a very powerful historian also. I guess I would let it go at that for the moment. Thank you.
Foley, Alabama. Hello, caller, are you there?
Yes, hello. I just wanted to say that I'm not the most articulate speaker in the world, but I'm in awe of Professor Bloom's intelligence and wisdom, and I do hope that he writes something about his experience and probably will show some difference in the experience that he had spiritually and his knowledge of literature. I hope that he puts that down on paper, and I would love to read it. And Emily Dickinson is one of my favorite poets, and I would just like to, Madness is the most divinest sense, as, and I don't think I have the title just correct, but that's one of my favorite poems. And it is something that has brought to question in my mind, for example, the caller who called from the Bible Belt, asking about the there's a difference in what we hear on there's a difference in what we hear or understand as literature, and there's a difference in what we know already in our hearts. And do you believe that possibly, because of the many history books that I've read, that there have been a number of Christianity-type stories that have been retold over and over throughout the ages, that it's the truth that's in our hearts that not necessarily we are able to put down into words?
Thank you, caller.
Well, the last part of what you were saying is a very deep matter. I'm sorry.
I was interested in the first part, when she suggested that you might write a book about your recent experience. Do you believe that your scholarship, your way of looking at literature, has changed by having a near-death experience?
Well, it's my second near-death experience. The first one, which took place when I was just about at my 60th birthday, when a bleeding ulcer nearly finished me off. Then I behaved stupidly. I can't afford to behave that stupidly again. I don't know. As I said, I fear that I am still not wholly myself. I probably am still partly traumatized.
But do you find yourself appreciating words in a different way, thoughts in a different way, because of
yes, yes. I think they're even more precious to me. I'm very glad indeed to be alive. I was very, very moved when about, must be 6 or 7 weeks ago, I went down to New York City for the first time in, I think, 10 or 11 months, and started to speak in public again 4 nights in a row. Ending up with an appearance with Charlie Rose, and then we came back here, and then we went out a lot to Washington, D.C., where I had the great pleasure of talking to Brian Lamb again, and to Baltimore, and to Boston, and so on. Very glad to be alive, very glad to be addressing live audiences again. I don't know, Susan. It's such a complex question. If I'm fortunate enough to get to meet you again in a year or so, I'll be better able to answer it. At the moment, I think I'm still a little overwhelmed by it all.
Just to change the mood a little bit, we've had, as we always do with In-Depth, all of our callers have been fans, admirers. But as you know, your works have been controversial over the years. And
I'm well aware that I have a great many non-admirers. Some of them, I would say, ideological, but that is to say, either people whom I have perhaps unfairly called the school of resentment, or neoconservatives, since I must admit, neoconservatives and I loathe one another. I find them quite unbearable, and they find me much the same, and good that we reciprocate in that regard. But also, I think there are a lot of readers, good, bad, and indifferent readers, who find me rather overbearing, I gather. There are a lot of reviewers who certainly don't care for me at all. Though I will now quote my two favorite aphorisms from the wonderful German aphorist Lichtenberg, who came just before Goethe, about book reviewing, since he had been savaged by book reviewers. They're both very famous. The second is even better than the first. The first goes, a book is a mirror. If an ape gazes into it, he shouldn't expect to see an angel. But far better, and I tend to repeat it all too often, when a book and a reviewer's head collide and we hear a hollow sound, is it always the book's fault?
May we listen to the words of one of those, Jason Epstein, and let's have you respond? We talked.
Oh, no, I will not. I mean, you may do what you wish, okay, but I will not respond. It's not actually Jason. I believe it's a Mr. Joseph Epstein.
Let's listen.
Whom I've never read and whom I will never read.
Harold Bloom is taken seriously only because these days criticism in literature isn't taken very seriously. He's kind of filling a void with his, strong opinions and unargued assertions. And my own not-so-humble view is that he's filling it with helium. My problem with Harold Bloom is that I think he's one of the great sort of self-dramatizers of our day. He's always, and I just don't see the drama. He's always talking in his apocalyptical manner about how dangerous reading is, how exhausting teaching is. He makes the very act of reading a poem or a novel sound as if it's the equivalent of bungee jumping or climbing Mount Everest. The way he talks about these activities makes you wonder how any professor of literature can get health insurance.
I have no comment whatsoever.
Okay. We'll move on to a telephone call. Washington, we got a smile out of you anyway with that. Washington.
Well, the smile was for you.
Well, I'll take it. Washington, D.C., you're next. Go ahead, please.
Hello, this is Nancy Iris in Washington, D.C. Professor Bloom, I'm enjoying the show very much, and personally I do think reading a book is like bungee jumping. But my question relates to the modern writer James McCourt, whom I know you're familiar with because you've written a blurb for one of his books. I'm interested in hearing how you experience him as a reader, and I'm also curious as to when you read and you come across vocabulary words you don't understand, do you stop at that point and look them up? Thank you very much.
Invariably, and the McCourt, as one calls him, as he calls himself, in his more ebullient moments, I've met him only twice, most recently in Washington, D.C. Before that, one day with Sandy McClatchy and the late James Merrill in New York City. McCourt does cause one to go to the dictionary very frequently, but it always does me good. I find him a wonderful writer, kind of throwback to a great, mostly now forgotten Edwardian novelist, Ronald Firbank, F-I-R-B-A-N-K. Immensely witty, McCourt. In a volume called Time Remaining of 3 short novels some years back, also poignant because it is about his loss of friends to the malady of AIDS. But thank you.
Here's a question from a viewer named Sally Chappelle, who writes, at a meeting at the New York Public Library last year, you said that the Nobel Prize winner, Jose Saramago, is the greatest living writer on the planet.
I don't think I said quite that. I did say that I thought that he was one of the few recent cases of a Nobel Prize for Literature that was totally deserved. And his sequence of novels, that I've written about a couple of times, I find very impressive indeed.
And here's one from a viewer named Jeffrey Sudak, who wants to know your opinion of George Eliot and Anthony Trollope.
Oh, well, George Eliot is certainly together with Charles Dickens and Jane Austen and Samuel Richardson, the author of Clarissa. I would think the four major novelists in the English language. Trollope is always good to read, morning, night, or any other time. There is an account of Trollope, which I absolutely believe. He commuted into London. I don't know whether he worked at the East India Office. I may have that wrong, but he worked as a civil servant in London. And he was, of course, endlessly prolific. And evidently, if, say, at 8:42 a.m., riding the train in, he finished a novel, he would turn over the foolscap page and half a moment later simply begin the next novel. And yet all of permanent quality.
We have about 35 minutes left. We're spending 3 hours with Harold Bloom on this first Sunday in May out of his home in New Haven, Connecticut. As you well know, Book TV, which is where you're talking to us today, spends most of its time in the realm of nonfiction. And our channel is really devoted to politics, policy making, and the discussion of issues. Leads me to ask you, where does a discussion about literature in society fit in the larger purpose of where we're going as Americans? In other words, does a conversation like this belong on C-SPAN?
Oh, I couldn't judge that, Susan. That's for you and Brian Lamb and your colleagues to judge. I'm not sure I have the insight.
I'm not asking it the right way, because what I'm really wondering is it necessary for us as a society to be literate?
No, the answer has to be mixed, I'm afraid. We hope that we are and will remain a democracy. Sometimes these days, I fear that we are closer to a plutocracy than to a democracy, or perhaps to an oligarchy. If we are to survive as a democracy, we had better have very intelligent citizens thinking, so far as I can understand, is really a process. One learns this, of course, from Augustine, deeply reliant upon memory. So the next question is, well, what is it that people ought to remember that will help them think better? And I would answer Shakespeare. I would answer John Milton. I would answer George Eliot. I don't think I'm being too idealizing when I say that.
Dayton, Ohio, you're on for Professor Bloom.
Yes. My question is about Wallace Stevens. Who do you think, if any, is the inheritor or poets? Who do you think are the inheritors of that style, that intelligence today, that voice?
Well, John Ashbery, the poet Mark Strand would certainly be another. He has a very admirable long poem called Dark Harbor, which tries to meet the whole question of Stevens's influence upon him by quite overtly recalling it and perhaps working in the mode of a poem like The Auroras of Autumn or An Ordinary Evening in New Haven. And there are, of course, others. Perhaps the most interesting and strongest example of this, someone who could superbly meet it, was Elizabeth Bishop, where in a late poem like The End of March, she seems very subtly to be engaging some of Stevens's major tropes and metaphors and undoing them from her own perspective. Thank you.
We have just a half an hour left. We're going to take a very quick break, and then we'll be back for our final 30 minutes with Harold Bloom. And just a half an hour left with Harold Bloom live from his house in New Haven, Connecticut, just a few blocks away from the campus at Yale, where he pursued his PhD and then has taught since the early 1950s. We're delighted to have you with us and him with us for this final half hour. Let's go right back to calls. San Francisco, California.
Yes, Professor.
Go ahead, caller.
Yes, Professor. First, I wish you better health. Your books have always brought me great joy.
It's very kind of you, and indeed, I am mostly recovered, I'm glad to say.
It's great to hear.
I'm sorry. Do go on.
Your books have given me tremendous insight and a great joy over the past few years, a tremendous joy.
It's very generous of you to say that, but go on.
I just recently found out, amazingly, that we attended the same high school in New York, the Bronx High School of Science, and I'm wondering...
yes, where I liked all my fellow students but hated the school.
I agree with you there. The students were quite bright, but yes, maybe in some ways the school was lacking. But I wonder if your love of literature and love of Shakespeare started there at high school, and I'll take my answer off the air.
No. They're very, very far from it. It had long preceded that, and I honestly could not say that that school... It was a torment for me. I shouldn't have been there, but it doesn't matter. But what years were you there, sir?
He's not there any longer.
All right.
Well, while he's asking about your roots, when was your first exposure to Shakespeare?
I think I started reading Shakespeare, starting with Romeo and Juliet and going on immediately to Macbeth. I don't know. It must have been, at that point, I must have been about 11, perhaps. And after that, it was continuous, but it changed after, when I think I was 16, I did see the old Vic in the 2 parts of Henry IV in New York City, with Rafe Richardson as Falstaff, and of course, both parts. They did part 1 as a matinee, and then the second part in the evening, and Laurence Olivier with superb versatility, playing the part of Hotspur in the afternoon, and then becoming Justice Shallow in the evening. I think that permanently changed the way I read Shakespeare.
Shalimar, Florida, and then Honolulu. Shalimar, Florida, go ahead, please.
Oh, Florida's better than Honolulu, at any rate. This is sort of related to your comment, Sue, about literature and politics. I'm very much interested in what the one lady said about written on the heart, and that is what the natural law, I believe, is all about. And I believe that Emerson had quite a bit to do about describing natural law. And I was just wondering if the professor has any insight into natural law from his point of view and natural law in literature.
I suppose, thank you, sir. I suppose that the highest mode of literature, be it the Bible or Shakespeare or Chaucer or Dante, in some sense is a kind of vindication of natural law. I'm not a legal scholar in any way, so I cannot really comment on the entire tradition of natural law. It fascinates me in its relationship to someone like Augustine, who, of course, knows of and argues for a higher law, revelation. But while the question is of enormous interest in itself, I'm not particularly competent to say much about it.
Larry Rabner of Akron, Ohio, writes us to ask, can you explain the notion of reading Proust after rather than before the age of 35?
I think I would agree with my friend Roger Shattuck that Proust, in one sense, is for all ages. I mean, he is certainly, with Joyce, the greatest Western writer of the century just past. It's, I think, true.
How many times do you think you've read Remembrance of Things Past?
In the original, perhaps just twice. In the 2 different English versions, particularly Terence Kilmartin's reworking of the Scott Moncrief version. I couldn't count how many times. It's like asking how many times one has read Shakespeare or Chaucer. It is, I think, quite true that, I don't know about more mature, but the older you get, the more you have experienced. As with Shakespeare, since Proust is a writer almost indeed comparable, if not indeed fully comparable, it does get richer and richer as you go along. You know, I would neither try to teach Shakespeare nor begin to write about him until I was well past 35, I just felt that I was not ready, that I didn't know anything well enough, including myself well enough. So I really just began to fully teach him and write extensively about him when I was in my late 40s or early 50s. Still, he, after all, as Proust does also, he deals with what Shakespeare calls the 7 ages of man, meaning men and women. One always keeps coming back to both.
Honolulu, thanks for waiting. You're on the air.
Hello, Professor Bloom. You mentioned earlier that you were less interested in the biographical backgrounds, the circumstances of the birth of an author. You'd just rather confront the text directly. So I wonder if you would say something specifically about the art of biography and more specifically about Leon Edell's work on Henry James.
Thank you. I think I misled you a little. My protest was against the current fashion of insisting that we really begin with the ethnic origin, the so-called race, the gender, the sexual orientation, and so on of a writer, which doesn't work with me at all. But the biography of great writers is, of course, of overwhelming interest, and I'm a determined reader of literary biography from its first masterpiece, and perhaps its greatest masterpiece, Boswell's Life of Dr. Samuel Johnson, through the late Richard Ellman, who was a good personal friend and who left us with great biographies of James Joyce and Oscar Wilde, the Wilde being perhaps Dick Ellman's masterpiece. Leon Edell's series of biographies of James are wonderfully done, and I've learned a great deal from them. They're not definitive, but then I don't know how you could have a definitive biography of Henry James, because he is so grand a writer that, and of course wrote some marvelous autobiographical volumes also, but he's so perfect and finished a writer, so great a reviser of himself. And he perhaps does present too great a challenge to any potential biographer.
Here's a question of a different sort from, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Jemont Zeiskander by email, who wants to know, are you a baseball fan?
Oh, I am. I'm a fanatical Yankee fan, and indeed when we are done today, I will dash over to the television set to see how we are doing this afternoon. I was taken when I was 6 years old back in 1936 by another much lamented uncle to my first baseball game. We lived only 9 or 10 blocks from the stadium in those days. And it was the summer of 1936. And actually the left fielder that year, if my memory is right, I think he switched to center field in 1937 for the rest of his career, was Mr. Joseph Paul DiMaggio. Excellent to watch, of course, at any time from then on. And I have been a confirmed Yankee fan ever since. But as I sometimes find myself saying, Yankee fans are perhaps so fanatical that they shouldn't be called baseball fans. Indeed, these days, when I am somewhat disaffected by the New York Times, which nevertheless my wife reads faithfully when it's delivered every morning, Usually, I just read the story on the Yankees and then give up.
Have your two loves ever converged? Have you ever read a terrific poem or novel or short story about baseball that you recall?
Well, there have been various middling to good baseball novels, but no great one that I remember. I'm not sure there is a single short story of really magnificent quality about baseball. Marianne Moore wrote one fairly good poem about baseball, about the Brooklyn Dodgers, I believe. But it's not necessarily vintage Marianne Moore. It's not like, say, her great poem called Marriage.
Do you remember how it goes?
No, it didn't sort of burn into me sufficiently so that I can recall very much of it.
Pepper Pike, Ohio.
Professor Bloom, it's delighted to watch you and listen to your erudition. While reading How to Read and Why, I thought, I wonder what Dr. Bloom has to say about John Updike and Larry McMurtry, in particular McMurtry's Lonesome Dove and the hilarious Texasville, if you've read it.
The latter author is certainly profoundly entertaining, very readable. I don't know that I know him well enough to say much more than that. I have something of a problem with Mr. Updike. We are not a mutual admiration society. I'll let it go at that.
In that same book, you talked about the ability for a reader to reach what you call as a reader's sublime.
Mm.
It struck me almost as the description of runner's call when they reach a runner's high. Can you put some words to that, reader's sublime?
Well, the idea of the sublime, of being upon the heights, goes back to the Perihoupsos, the Hellenistic critical work by the writer tradition calls Longinus. And the idea of the sublime, upon which Anne Carson has written very strong recent both poems and prose. It has become a very difficult literary category to evoke or perhaps fully to understand. Certainly Emily Dickinson, when she writes her poems, sometimes highly ironic about what she calls transport, is very much playing with the mode of the sublime. Wallace Stevens has a poem of self-mockery called The American Sublime. And of course, if you're going to speak about an American sublime, you necessarily go back to Emerson, who is the theorist of the American sublime. I like the question very much because it brings up the crucial matter of what is the relationship between imaginative literature and the deep desire that I think most men and women have for some kind of transcendence, for some sense of what we in Wordsworth called effort and expectation and desire and something ever more about to be. That sense of wanting more than even the most intense natural or erotic experience can bring us. That sense of wishing what Wordsworth calls something more sublimely infused, must finally be what most of us who read incessantly are looking for in literature. Certainly Shakespeare and the Bible and Dante afford more instances of the sublime. When I was very ill and in the hospital, self-dramatizer, as evidently certain persons regard me as being, I found myself endlessly repeating inwardly to myself perhaps the most sublime passage, I sometimes think, in all of Shakespeare, in Measure for Measure, where the Duke, who is pretending to be a friar, is advising young Claudio, who due for execution. It is, after all, a comedy, one of the strangest, if not the strangest of all comedies. He's about to be executed for the great crime of fornication, and I have gotten with child, a lady to whom, in fact, he is betrothed to be married. And the mock friar says to him, you know, how are you in effect? And Claudio replies, I have hope to live and I'm prepared to die. And you get the devastating speech, which is, I think, as much of the sublime as one can have. Be absolute for death, either death or life shall thereby seem the sweeter. Reason thus with life. If I do lose thee, I would lose a thing that none but fools would cherish. Merely thou art death's foal. For him thou laborest by thy flight to shun, and yet runs toward him still. And then there's this is more than overwhelming. Thou hast nor youth, nor age, but as it were an after dinner sleep, dreaming on both. That seems to me to articulate a kind of sense of the sublime, almost as much as anything could.
Los Angeles, you're on the air.
Hi, Professor Bloom.
Yes.
It's wonderful listening to you today, and Godspeed in your continued recovery. I'd like to ask you, if you would, to discuss your reflections on the nexus between poetry and philosophy.
An ancient vexed quarrel undertaken by Plato, surely greatest of philosophers, against Homer, greatest of ancient poets, and a rival indeed to the Torah. As you know, Plato in the Republic exiles Homer, exiles the poets. Had Shakespeare shown up in Plato's Republic, no doubt Plato would have respectfully shown him to the border and pushed him back over it. It is the most ancient of quarrels, and I don't suppose it will ever end. Shakespeare, who to me, I suppose, does seem like the beginning, the middle, and the end of everything. It fascinates me that two of the greatest of philosophers, David Hume and Ludwig Wittgenstein, had very mixed feelings about Shakespeare. In reading Hume on Shakespeare, one does hear renewed the ancient quarrel between poetry and philosophy. Wittgenstein gives it a very surprising turn of his own when he tries to say, perhaps we should think of Shakespeare as a creator of language, and I think that is an evasion on Wittgenstein's part, because surely, though, of course, a creator of language, Shakespeare is also a creator of thought. He is a creator of meaning. In fact, I would think more than any other writer of whom we have record, Shakespeare is the great teacher of how meaning gets started.
We have about 9 minutes left. Our next call is from Indianapolis. Hello, caller.
Yes, it's a pleasure to talk with you today, Mr. Bloom. I have a question.
Thank you.
In regards to the relevance of the poet Weldon Keys. It's hard to find a lot of information on him, and I was just wondering what your opinion is of his stature as a modern poet. Thank you.
A very good poet, indeed. I reread him almost continually. I think he has a fair number of admirers, perhaps more among poets than a general public, though he's a very different poet from my own, one of my great favorites, who now also is only read by a few poets and critics, John Brooks Wheelwright, a Boston poet killed alas by a drunken driver in Boston, I think when he was 39 or 40, and who left a great elegy on Hart Crane called Fish Food, in no disparagement of Crane, and a wonderful poem, in effect saying, come over to America and help us in the 14ers of William Blake's prophetic books. But Keys, I think, is a permanent poet. I cannot altogether understand why Keys and Wheelwright do not have more admirers than they have.
This viewer wants to bring you into the debate over the school system and teaching. Floyd Hidalgo asks, do you feel a great books curriculum, such as the one used by St. John's of Annapolis, could benefit the public school system?
Yes, I strongly do feel that, though I would be in despair if I tried to argue the point, since most public school systems are now all but altogether given over to setting works for study that directly come from the, I don't want to go through it again, the question of ethnic origin and so forth, but I don't want to get into that again. Thank you.
Last calls from Laguna Beach.
Hello?
You're on the air, caller.
Sir? Hello?
Yes. Yes. Hello?
Pleasure to speak to you, sir. I really respect your great knowledge and intellect. What is your opinion on, or ideas on the charge that colleges and universities are staffed primarily by professors on the left side of the political spectrum? Do you think there should be more intellectual diversity there? And secondly, what are your thoughts on postmodernist literature now? Thank you very much.
Thank you. To start with the second of your points, I don't think there is such a thing as postmodernist literature. I think that what is called modernist literature and so on, these are all, I think, different phases of what we can call post-Enlightenment literature, that is to say post-Miltonic literature in English. And I don't find profound differences between 19th century so-called modernist and so-called postmodernist literature. As to the first, I'm not at all sure that I agree with you. It hardly seems to me that most university and college faculties are, staffed by my fellow members of the Democratic Party with a capital D, or liberals among us. My complaints, of course, are not really against people who take one stand or another in national politics, but who would substitute their version of cultural politics for a broader view of culture. But thank you.
We are just about out of time. We have 2 minutes left. You write about your own childhood experience. Let me ask on behalf of the parents or grandparents who have been watching us today. You've written how to read and why, but how would you suggest interesting a young person in today's society in the benefits of reading?
Well, I partly out of my quite negative reaction to the prevalence of the Harry Potter books, which seemed to me rubbish, only good for the dustbin, where they will certainly wind up in a generation or so. I did compile an anthology a couple of years back with the rather outrageous title, Stories and Poems for, I think it's over there somewhere, for extremely intelligent, there it is, for extremely intelligent children of all ages, including oneself, and it was meant as a kind of introduction, which would bring together a great many stories and poems that I thought was very appropriate.
If you have a young person who doesn't like to read,
Well, it is an interesting puzzle. A lot of people have said to me that it's all very well for me to deplore the Harry Potter books, but nevertheless, this is the one thing that their children will read. I think the whole question is, well, what will they read after they have read Harry Potter? Will they go on to Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass? Will they go on to Kenneth Graham's The Wind in the Willows? Will they go on really to high literature? Will they go on to Mark Twain and to Hemingway and eventually Jane Austen? I thought in a way that the novelist Stephen King, whose work does not move me, got this quite right. I don't think he was being ironical. Somebody showed this to me, that in a review in the Sunday Times book review of, perhaps it was the 4th volume in the Potter series, he welcomed it and said, "This is wonderful." He said, if they are reading this when they are 10 or 11 or 12, then they will graduate to reading Stephen King a year or two later. I would not argue with him at all about that.
We are out of time. I want to tell our audience that your very latest book, Hamlet Poem Unlimited, is available at bookstores and booksellers all across the country right now. And I want to wish you and Jean a very happy 45th wedding anniversary, and thank you very much for allowing In Depth to come to your house for the past 3 hours. We appreciate the conversation.
Thank you immensely, Susan, and thank Brian for me when you see him.
We shall do that. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate all of your interest in Harold Bloom and his writings.
You've been watching In Depth with Harold Bloom. If you missed any portion of the 3-hour interview, you can see the program again at 5 p.m. Eastern and tonight at midnight Eastern. Next month on In Depth, Noam Chomsky